Welcome to Happeo Unmuted, the podcast where we speak openly about what it really takes to connect people at work. From internal comms and knowledge sharing to the messiness of change and the rise of AI, we go beyond best practices to unpack what's working, what's not, and what's worth rethinking. Our host, Bourgeault-Trickey, has spent over 10 years in internal comms, building and launching intranets for organizations in telecoms and finance. He now leads client services at Happeo, where he's helped over 120 businesses across the globe create and grow engaging digital workplaces that drive organizational goals and objectives. If you care about how people in your organization share, learn, and adapt, this is your show. And if you're looking for a modern digital HQ, you can find us at happeo.com.
Welcome to Unmuted, the podcast where we explore the messy, brilliant, and occasionally unfiltered world of internal comms, knowledge sharing, and digital transformation. I'm your host, Bourgeault-Trickey from Happeo. So our guest today is Kait Gillen. Kait is a strategic communications leader who helps companies turn big ideas into messages that connect. With a background in psychology and over 10 years of experience across tech, finance, and mission-driven organizations, she bridges the gap between leadership vision and employee experience. We're really glad to have you here, Kait. Thanks for jumping in.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jesse.
So I wanted to start off with our unmuted moments, as we do. And so I wanted to ask our first question, which is, if internal comms had a blooper reel, what would be on yours?
Yeah. I mean, it'd be a long reel, but one of the moments that jumps out for me is I was a young communications professional and was working on some board of directors materials. And we always packaged those up and shared them with the company. And I inserted a Google form that was meant to solicit responses from the employees. Little did I know until after I PDF'd and sent it to all 600 employees that I had inserted the back-end editing form rather than the response form. And so one by one, the Slacks start ping, 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 hey, Kate, hey, Kate, hey, Kate, hey, Kate. So then I went back into said document, which again, it's a PDF. So there's no quick fixes here. There's no sneakily swapping out links that no one will notice. I had to go back in, re-PDF it, correct the form. And then I don't remember what the second snafu was, but there was definitely a second snafu. And so there was not one, but two, but three versions of that final document.
Oh.
And, as I tell my team now, we don't get to make mistakes quietly. Unfortunately, they happen on a very big stage. So lesson learned on that Google form link for sure.
Yeah. Oh, we've all been there. I'm sure we've all been there. It's one of the reasons that I've always hated email, is just that like finality of it and just out there, and oh God. Yeah. And when we switched over to first starting using like intranets, that was the biggest thing. And it was really hard to explain that to people. Like, oh, I can actually go and just change this message. I can just, add a different link or whatever. And all of them, it's all nicely patched up, right?
Yeah. The beauty of technology. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. How about what's one moment that made you fall in love with the work you do or totally question your life choices?
I'm gonna go with so to be clear, I do love the work I do, but I did in fact very many times question my life choices, particularly early on. I have a great photo that I would be happy to share of myself at one of my first company on-site events. And I'm standing there and I am wearing what looks like to be the landing gear appropriate for directing air traffic. And I am just deer in headlights, staring out, holding my hands. And you can see every single thought just running through my head. So like just my eyes clear as day, clearly questioning everything. And so that first company on site, I was really in the thick of it. I had not been in seat for a very long time. And I had an excellent mentor and manager guiding me through, though, who also had very high expectations. And so we were running the big show. And that was a moment that, really, really made me question. The flip side of that, though, is then years later, there was an internal reorg, and so I was no longer reporting to this wonderful mentor, and I was the one running the program. I was then the director of internal at the Motley Fool, and running the onsite myself. So as I was kind of running around the corner, in producer mode, I caught eyes with her sitting in the audience, and it was just a beautiful full circle moment for my career, and just to have that moment of connection with her. And these on sites, they're such a labor of love, and sometimes a labor of hate. And sometimes you're just losing your mind. But yeah, I think there are two sides of that coin for sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's such an awesome story. And maybe you'll be that person sitting in that seat, looking up on the stage and seeing that next person, right? And just sort of
Yeah,
passing that torch along.
yeah.
That's really cool. Yeah. I yeah, I've also, been on the stage wondering what's going on right now. That
Right? Like honestly, it is truly I call it the Olympics of internal comms, because it's just all of the elements come together. You have the programming, the executive coaching, everything down to the stage design fell under my purview. And so there's just not a lot of room for error.
yeah, maybe think about some of the other colleagues I've had would be there, but they'd also be like wearing the company mascot uniform or like like things like that that kind of add that cherry on top, right?
Right, right. Well, yeah, I learned at one of my on-sites, I had directed a fashion show. At another on-site, I participated in a flash mob. So, it's just there's always something. There's always something
Yeah,
to feel
yeah.
like special.
hmm Yeah, it's really that like you have to have the tool belt and you have to understand it's like other duties as required for some reason really seems to resonate with this type of role from time to
Right,
time. So, yeah.
right.
Yeah, right on. Maybe we'll switch over to the work behind the work segment. So the question I have is when people think about your role, what's the biggest thing they misunderstand?
I think the biggest thing that people misunderstand about internal communications is that we are not here just to communicate the end product. And I think this is something that folks in the field have been talking about more and more often. The fact that, the internal communications function, for it to be its very best, we're at the decision making table. We are providing strategic guidance and counsel long before whatever copy is written, whatever campaign comes together. Um, in order to be effective, in order to help companies and executives look around the corner, which is such an important part of our job, we have to be there to help you make those decisions. Um, we have an insight and kind of bring that very unique 30,000-foot view that frankly only the top executive in the company is really thinking about otherwise. Um, there's a great meme I saw posted from a leader in the field. I'm gonna butcher her name if I try to remember it, but I was talking about compensation for chief communications officers, and question was, oh, where should the compensation start? And the response was, "Well, what does your chief counsel make?" That's probably a good ball range, right? Like that right there is probably something you should be considering, because of when the role and the function is done correctly, the value that we can bring is immense. On the other side of that, if you kind of pigeonhole them as like, "Hey, can you review this copy?" or "Hey, can you make a newsletter?" Um, you're going to get what you enable that function to be out of it.
Right. Absolutely. I'm 100% behind you. And I've seen the difference of going, working with different teams, the
Yeah,
kind of like involvement that they have, whether they're sort of at the end of the chain or they're sort of building the chain with the team, right?
right.
Just totally different outcomes. And it's really interesting to see sort of the difference, especially at like the leadership level too, the way that those leaders typically act or talk. You can kind of get a bit of a difference there too.
Mhm.
I am really curious though, because of the fact that you've been sort of establishing different communication strategies. I'd love to hear a little bit more about like what that might have looked like for you, like how to go about getting that seat at the table. Were you just lucky enough to have a leader that sort of already grasped it and you were able to sort of use that to your advantage? Um, what did that maybe look like? Could you maybe speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a bit of luck, and there's a little bit of buy-in that it all has to kind of be there, right? I
Mhm.
had the privilege of learning from that great mentor I mentioned earlier, who really demonstrated for me what it should look like. And not everyone has that. And so I credit it all back to seeing that early example in my career of this is how effective we can be, this is how impactful we can be, and learning from her. And so knowing that then as I move forward into, building other functions and other roles, that was just kind of my baseline expectation. That's how I positioned myself. When I go out into the marketplace to talk about a role or an opportunity, that's my expectation.
Yeah.
And I think you just kind of have to be unforgiving with that expectation when you are talking with people about, the work that we do. It is very important to educate your future potential stakeholders on, this is what my work actually looks like. This is what I need in order to be successful. I've told, many an executive point blank, if I'm not in the room, I cannot help you. I cannot help you the way that you want me to help you. And
Mhm.
so it just sets that expectation early on. I think that's the most essential piece. And then you back it up by building accordingly, right? You have to be able to, the onus is then on you. If you have said and set the expectation that, hey, I'm a strategic player, you better bring a strategy.
Yeah, I think that line of you can't help them if you're not in the room is very important. Like I love that as like a slogan or something like that for internal comms, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I really like that. As far as being able to establish that kind of structure or that kind of strategy going forward at the org, like previously in my past, it's been all about the idea of establishing a clear intake flow, or maybe having like an editorial calendar for the year that you're sort of aligning with the org to say like we need to have a strategy around like what are we doing, how much can I know in advance in order to sort of understand how all these things should fit together. Obviously thinking about the end user and or the team member of like how much stuff can they handle, right?
Mhm.
Could you maybe speak to that? Like I'm kind of curious like how you might what you might have been able to build so far or what that looks like for you today.
Yeah, I think for me, I always start with the at the very highest level. It's incredibly important that the communication strategy is reflective of the broader strategy for the company. And so building those core communications priorities around the company priorities, objectives, goals, etc.
Mhm.
And so that for me has always started with data, and gathering data to make sure that, as I'm building and as I'm prioritizing those strategies, um, around the business, what data do I already have? What data do I need to ensure that we are well aligned? And so starting there thematically with, all right, the company is going after profitability and high growth this year. What communications efforts do we need in order to help amplify that business goal and drive that outcome? What's already in place? So starting with what's already in place, what are my priorities? What's already in place? What data do I need that I don't have? Once I have all of that information, then I'm taking those inputs and crafting the strategy from there. So one of the big things that I've focused on here at Upside has been on our programming strategy. So building out the programming strategy as part of the broader, communication strategy is that, when I look at the data set that I have, I see that we have gaps around cross-functional connection. We have gaps
Mhm.
around employee engagement. And so what are some specific programmatic elements that we can introduce to drive that, to then drive those business outcomes that we're looking for in 2025? So that's
Mhm.
kind of the flow and the thought process. Two of the programs that we've created, one of the programs is called Link, and it
Mhm.
is a quarterly company event that is designed to bridge company culture across location. And so whether you are a remote employee or you're in our DC office or you're in our Austin office, one day out of the quarter, we're all doing some kind of event where we have a shared experience, whether it's an escape room, whether it's a sip and paint, whatever other cheesy corporate thing we want to throw out there, right? There's only so many options, people. I saw a meme about this recently, and I was like, hey, there's only so many corporate friendly events you could come up with. But if anybody has any ideas, shoot me a note because I'm always looking for fresh ideas. But the point of these events is that we're creating the fabric of our culture. We are creating the connective tissue, even though we are in different locations. And then we're doing that throughout the year. Because what else I saw on the data was that we love our company on-sites. Our company on-sites are absolutely vital to kind of our life cycle and how we move about in the year.
Mhm.
But we can only do those we're currently doing them twice a year. And so what do you do in all the inner in between moments, and how do you keep building those connections and driving forward to grow that connective tissue that makes up the broader culture? So that's one of the programs. And then the other one is called Spark, and it is really focused on our business initiatives and driving conversations around our cross-functional teams and cross-functional initiatives, and igniting new ideas to help advance the business. Because another data point takeaway for us was how much our people care about the work they're doing and how passionate they are about that. So giving them opportunities to continue to build connections, but doing it in the context of our work and advancing our work and our goals. So that's a piece of what we've been working on. A lot of focus on the programming so far, shifting focus now to kind of a broader, to your point, editorial outlook of what are all the different touch points across our channels, our Slack channel,
Sure.
holistic strategy there.
Nice. Yeah. So it sounds like you're sort of looking to address what I kind of call it as two different buckets of communications, where it's like
Yeah.
company communications versus operational communications.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like you're looking to right the ship as far as company communications is concerned,
Yep.
really with a focus of engagement. And I'm wondering, like, are you measuring internal team member retention and all that kind of stuff? Maybe,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I can only imagine, like, I keep thinking about that with respect to things like those events, right? Like, are you able to see that there's an obvious correlation between the people who are going to these events versus the
Right.
people who will be churning, right? And so it's just, that's the kind of ROI stuff that I love to see.
Yeah.
And
It's
cool.
incredibly
So
impactful. Well, that's where you make the case as an internal communicator that it's not just a nice to have, right? It's where
yeah.
you make the case their culture strategy is not just a nice to have.
Yeah, there's the effort of like making these great events, but then there's the effort of pulling all this data and being able to measure it, and you kind of need both of those tool sets. So
Yeah, definitely.
right on. I guess you might have already spoken to it, but it was kind of one of the questions I wanted to ask was sort of like, what's a small internal change you've made that had a surprisingly big impact? Is there anything that kind of stood out as far as these initial efforts that you've made so far that you can think of?
I would say one very small change, I don't know if it's very small, medium small change, was that, prior to me joining, a lot of the holdings level communications efforts were happening in a silo, and not inclusive of cross functional department leaders, right? So you have your department leaders who were responsible for department level communications, and there wasn't a strong bridge between the people team and holdings and executive communications and those department level communications. And so what I have done is created what I call just a cross-functional communications council. And we get together every so often. We worked in lockstep, on the last company on site. And it really just made a huge difference in the planning process and in the outcomes that we were able to create by building those bridges, and just keeping everybody on the same page, and building partnerships and letting those folks know that I'm a resource for them, as much as they could be a resource for me to get stuff done. So I think that has definitely been something meaningful but small in the big scheme.
That's great. Did you sort of use an internet channel or something like that to get everybody together talking to each other, or like what was the medium there?
So we use Slack, and so our we put everybody in a Slack channel to start, and then we just do Google Meet on a regular basis, and we're a Google shop, so everything goes back then into Google Docs and Sheets and that kind of thing for tracking purposes.
Yeah, right on. Are you doing like an editorial calendar with them yet? Have you got to that kind of
Yeah,
level?
so that is like we're right in the thick of that right now. We've built out focus first on building out the internal comms, like my team's workflows, but now we're building that out and expanding it to cross-functional across all those areas to make sure we're keeping tabs on all the content,
Yeah.
because there's a lot.
Nice. Yeah, again, it's that case too where you're helping them help themselves, right? It's like if 10 of you post on Monday, but none of you post the rest of the week, like who's
Right,
really benefiting there, right?
right.
That's great. Or have you been able to get any kind of alignment around like style guides or standards, branding, or like review intake and things like that?
Yeah, I think that one is one of those more uphill battles. I will say I
Yeah.
think our people do a pretty good I think our people do a pretty good job. And so for me, it's a question of what is the ROI on that,
Yeah.
right? We're a small enough company that I think that, giving them the freedom to pursue, to write how they want to write, and I'm just less caught up on it. I will say that I'm working to introduce more of the smart brevity principles at the manager level. Is kind of
Yeah.
the way I'm looking at it, is like, hey, this is a tool for you as managers, and then hope to see that kind of proliferate across the organization, because I do see that as really the one zone where I feel like the juice is worth the squeeze. We've got to get our communications to be more concise and more user friendly, so that people are actually reading them and taking the information.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a zone of interest for me.
Mhm. I've always kind of experimented or attempted this idea of doing like a peer review as well. Like if maybe I can't get involved, but like, can you at least just show it to somebody who's in the audience beforehand, or
Right.
double check with somebody else before you kind of send that thing out? Because once you send it, right? So
Yeah, it's out there. It's out there. And I think, for folks who are not communicating as like their full-time job, they're like, why
mhm.
does it have to be so many steps? Right. Like, so
Yeah,
why does this have to be this way? And it is a gradual sell, I think, to get them. And so you have to find what's in it for me as quickly as possible and the path of least resistance. And I think what I'm looking at is the combination of something like smart brevity and AI. Those are your tools. Go forth. And if I see something glaring, I will let you know.
yeah. Are they doing measurement at this point, or is it more like you're just glad that they're talking to each other and sort of letting everybody know, or like is any of that going on?
Yeah, there's some measurement mostly done by me in terms
Yeah.
of, I'm looking at Slack, I'm looking at open rates, I'm looking at engagement,
Mhm.
and where I see I'm kind of building my case
Yeah.
where I see the data telling the story that I'm already telling, right? And so that's how I'm backing into it more slowly, giving it more time so that I can take a more grassroots approach versus just coming in with the hammer and saying, "This is how this shall be."
Yeah.
Doesn't work very well in my experience. So,
Right. Yeah, yeah. That's actually a great segue into my next question, which was like, how are you defining successful communication in a world of chaos, noise, and 800 Slack channels?
yeah, I mean, I think for me, I anchor my success on our engagement survey and the outcomes of that. That tells the story. For the most part, I have a couple of questions in there around communications. I have questions in there around understanding the company strategy. Um, Obviously, overall engagement. I look at that as
Mhm.
an indicator of my success too, particularly since my role very directly um, at Upside crosses into employee experience as well.
Right.
And so I'm wearing a couple of hats as per most internal comms folks. Of course, in my past lives, internal comms and employee experience has always kind of gone hand in hand, but there's more direct focus there. So overall engagement, I think, is incredibly indicative. And then, what are you seeing? What are we seeing on a day-to-day basis, right? Like, obviously cannot wait for the annual engagement survey to evaluate. So what is that engagement that I'm seeing in Slack, at events, in conversations? How many people are reading the newsletter? There's just kind of that constant, perpetual looking at the data to see how folks are coming along, and what they are not engaging with. And I think a strong engagement score and a strong day-to-day engagement is that's where success is.
Mhm. What are you looking at as far as like daily engagement, right? Like it's funny how often people ask me, like what's the metric that I should be shooting for, or like, what's the silver bullet? And I'm like, well, it's going to be relative to your organization. There's a lot
Right.
of factors that go into it. So I'm kind of curious, like you mentioned before that you were measuring Slack and
Yeah.
read rates and stuff like that. Like, do you kind of have your own metrics or internal standards that you've been able to establish now, or is it still just sort of generally getting a sense of it at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly have a a bar that I look to
Mhm.
see things clear. I look to see us clearing a 90% read rate, and if we're not
Yeah.
clearing a 90% read rate, then I've got questions and concerns, and then that tells me that we need to do something else without those materials to make sure that it's resonating. And the read rate is one piece of it. It depends on the communication, what other factors I may take into account as well, right? Because if it's a new policy announcement, I'm not necessarily going to look at emojis because, okay, cool, it's a policy, whatever, move on with your lives. If it is something that should be exciting to people, then yeah, I'm going to look at the emojis as well as another form, another data point to see like how many people are slowing down to interact with this. Comments are less of a thing. We're not so much a comment culture, so I don't look at as much at that, but certainly combination of read rates and emojis, which, makes my job sound really legitimate. Count emojis. Just counting emojis. It's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, it's funny because you can kind of use them as almost like a form of pulse survey if
Oh
you,
yeah.
if you asked for them, right? Like, give me a this if you like it, or, give
Right.
me a thumbs down if you don't understand what I'm saying here, that.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Nice. Well, maybe we'll, as we start talking more about the technology behind our work, we'll switch over to the segment 3 here. So the question I had was, how do you see AI shaping internal comms and knowledge sharing? Are we being realistic or a bit delusional?
I have a lot of thoughts here. I want to ask a follow-up question. When you say realistic or a bit delusional, explain more about that. What are we on what aspect?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. There's a lot of different facets to this going on now, and it seems like there's new ones every week. I think it's more like up to you, depending on like maybe if there's a particular part that really resonated with you when that as far as like your role or any kind of maybe themes or topics that have been coming up internally. Sometimes you're hearing these things from like leadership, for instance, might be putting a bit of a mandate out there, like let's use more of X, or maybe you've read a recent article about how AI is going to reshape internal comms, and you're not necessarily following along with what they're putting down, right? So
Sure. I mean, I think holistically, as a field, my I think the baseline formula that I hear most people talking about is that, the world is moving this way. If you're not using AI, you will be left behind. AI won't take your job, but it'll take, you'll be replaced by somebody who does use AI essentially. I think that's generally right. Where if we are being a little bit delusional is the AI won't ever take your job piece. I do think that is, I think that's a tall order and something I certainly think about periodically is, as AI develops more and more, what is it going to look like to be a communicator in 10 years? Shoot, in like 5 years, in 2 years, who knows at the rate that we're advancing. And
yeah.
so I think that's just, I don't have any real pearls there other than to say, I think as communicators, it is our job at this point to be as adept and as fluent in AI usage as possible. I think you cannot be I think you cannot work in this space right now and compete without it simply because of the scale that it offers.
Mhm.
But I also think that it's incredibly important that you don't lose yourself in it. If you're having a moment, if ChatGPT goes down and you suddenly go into a massive panic, is that a good thing? And no, this is not a conversation that I have recently had with myself at all. Uh, because it really does become, for me, it's like an appendage. Like I am every day using it for one thing or another. And I think we just have to be very cognizant of the fact and remind ourselves to to um to just not rely too heavily on it, and to remember that at the end of the day, we hold years and years of expertise. And as human beings, we're gonna have the best answer. At this point, anyway.
Yeah, I mean, that years of expertise piece, the soft skills side of it,
Right,
being in the room, being at the table, it's pretty
right,
hard to bring in the AI to the table at the moment. So there's,
right. Yeah,
and and I definitely agree with you. Like there is going to be a shift that goes along with all of this too, which is to say, like, communications will likely shift, and there will be experts in communications, whatever that communications looks like. based on the kind of shift that we're seeing as a result of the technology too. So
Right.
it's kind of what we're seeing, like at least from our perspective and my perspective, is that the knowledge management side of things also tends to kind of now lean into what
Yeah.
is internal comms, just like what you were talking about before with the employee experience. So there's kind of like the spectrum now of these various sort of disciplines that are all starting to come together now because the tools exist, whereas they
Right.
weren't necessarily there before. So
Yeah,
yeah, that'll
definitely.
be cool to see. I mean, speaking of that, that's kind of a follow-up question here is like, do you think that tools can fix culture? Like, have you seen anything like that starting to happen yet?
Mm.
Or, is that more like a hype or a convenient excuse right now for challenges you might have seen in other areas or at other orgs and things like that?
Yeah, I think it depends on how you define culture.
Right.
And I think for me, it could never fix culture because when I think of culture to me is it's that fabric of the organization. It's the stories that we tell each other, the good stories, the bad stories. It's all of that kind of shared experience. And I think certainly tools can facilitate it. Um, but it cannot change the narrative and it cannot change the impact of it itself. I think it can advance or it can harm depending on what the tool is. But my general take is that that culture is something that is so um, intangible that we can't necessarily build, create, or change it with a tool.
Mm. Yeah, I think I've yet to see a formal measurement for culture outside of just sort of like the engagement scores, I
Yeah,
guess, is the way of sort of framing it.
yeah,
But it'd be kind of interesting to think about like a cross-section comparison to other orgs
yeah.
and kind of have like cultural comparisons and things like that. So yeah, it's a curious thing though to consider the fact that these organizations have this as an underlying piece and there's so few resources sort of, you
It
know,
really is. It
working
really
on
is.
that piece, right? So
And as soon as you said that, I'm like, ooh, I kind of want to figure out now how to right because it's like I think of it as this. It's such an important force. It's such an important force, but we don't know how to effectively measure it yet.
mm. Um, Maybe if we switch to another kind of a tool question here. So, like, what makes a tool actually usable inside an organization, or what do vendors always seem to miss, at least from your experience with tools?
I think one of the shortcomings now, I was just talking with my colleague actually in knowledge management about this, is that so many platforms offer so much, you know. They offer so much and they're not necessarily excellent at all of it. Um, and so what ends up happening then is you become inundated with platforms with overlapping functionality, with use cases that you're always struggling to define because there's so much functionality. Your HRIS can also do your rewards, your Swag's platform can also do rewards and recognition and God, I was just looking at one the other day and the list was a mile long. And so there's all of these different functionalities and offerings, and it just requires constant, um, constant for you to constantly redefine the use case and the scope for each platform to ensure that there is not confusion when it comes to the adoption of the tool or the implementation of the tool. And so I think it would really behoove, I certainly understand that for many platforms the diversification allows them to sell into different areas. It allows them to diversify their revenue. But I think personally that just doing a few things really, really well and just being really excellent at those is something that is missing a bit from the industry. I think we're all trying. I think the platforms holistically are just trying to do too much.
Yeah, the struggle is real as far as like that governance piece that you mentioned before.
Yeah.
I mean, like every client I work with, I have to sort of sit them down and have that conversation with them.
Yeah.
You're introducing an intranet, there's going to be overlap, and
Yeah.
so you got to make sure that everybody understands how these things work together. It's kind of funny because it ends up turning into this sort of case of you probably haven't had this conversation yet with the org. Is a lot of the times what's coming up. And then, again, if you don't necessarily have a good internal comms person to be
Right.
able to create that awareness or to be able to verify that there is that awareness, then you're
Right.
getting all these inefficiencies to go along with it as a result. So
Right.
yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, it is a big topic though, that idea of all these overlapping tools. So it'd be
Yeah.
interesting to see where that kind of goes from here, especially if you think about all the integrations that go with it in
Right.
the world now today, right?
Well, and then, now AI and the AI integrations and like it's almost like it's just endless. It is
Yeah.
just endless. I get a little overwhelmed if I think about it too much. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's funny because that'll probably lead us to that point where we would be able to measure culture is having this sort of net of all these tools talking to each other, all the data being aggregated back,
right,
having
right,
an analyst to be able to kind of rake over that and figure out what's working, what isn't, what is the impact for the people, right? So
right.
yeah, it'll be curious to see where it goes, and I imagine we'll get there at some point, but it's just sort of how or when. So
Yeah. Definitely.
nice. So maybe we'll switch over to our next segment of spicy takes. So, if you could unlearn one best practice in your field, what would it be?
I don't know if this is a best practice, but I catch myself using corporate lingo too much. And I actually, this may be the opposite of a best practice, but I feel like it's a best practice in how we talk to each other and how we talk about the work sometimes. And it's the circle back and it's the, I don't know, of course, now I can't think of any right now, but I do think that I have to, anytime I write something when it comes to strategy in particular, and you're talking to non communicators, I have to write it, get it out of my head, write it again, maybe write it one more time and then turn it into something that people can actually understand. My
Yeah.
strategy as it stands, my strategy statement for Upside is the purpose of the internal communications team is to unite our story, our strategy, and our spirit. That is not where it started. Not where it started. And so, really just peeling back all of those layers of communication ease that are helpful when you are talking to communicators and not helpful when you are talking to other stakeholders. So,
Mhm.
less editing there would be awesome.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very good point. And so it's also funny, like all these people in internal comms roles are just dying to talk to people, or like very verbose as far as like their writing.
Yes.
We all come from backgrounds of honing our craft, and then it's like, oh yeah, I have to appeal to the lowest common denominator. It's,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Maybe in the next question, what's something you wish more execs understood about the employee experience?
I think holistically something that's I've spoken to this a little bit, but I think the concept of a strong employee experience, which I believe contributes to a strong and healthy culture, um, as like a nice to have. It's a nice to have. It's a cherry on top. I think that we kind of wax and wane in this zone as to how we think about it as a society, right? You've seen that with trends over the past few years. The accommodations of COVID and that era where people felt more empowered, they felt better supported, businesses were leaning into that, and now you see that kind of decline where it's becoming less center stage. Certainly, you see that in government spaces and in civilian and private sectors. And so, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what kind of business results. There could be a very interesting case study 10, 15 years from now when we look back at that COVID era and what we were able to create during that era. And I say COVID era, but I mean really, 2020 to maybe 23, 24, when things kind of really started ramping up into decline. I think it's not a I had a colleague say it's not a popular time to be in employee experience necessarily in the job market. And so it's very telling. So but what I wish they really understood though is that it's a force multiplier. The same way I think about, diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a force multiplier. You're bringing in diverse perspectives. You're elevating those voices. You're building an inclusive environment where they can actually thrive. Your business is going to be better for it. And so, yeah, I think it's an easy thing to kind of toss out the window when times get hard, when margins are tighter, when prices are rising. Let's buckle down, and everyone just needs to do their job and not worry about the experience. And you lose something in that when you take that approach that makes us all less effective.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you kind of mentioned the pendulum, and the longer you're in this type of career path, it tends
Mm.
to really stand out more and more as you go.
Yeah.
But so I do anticipate that we'll probably see that swing back in the near future. One of the things that I'm wondering about as well is just this concept of all the anxiety, because we kind of talked about it earlier, is this whole shift with AI. And I
Right.
feel like how are organizations navigating that with all of their employees, and are they kind of speaking to that, or are they providing insight, or again trying to sort of reinforce the culture and build the culture, knowing that there's a lot of shift and change going on outside, which can distract or kind of make people feel a little bit more uneasy about what they're doing. So I think that there's definitely some value there that needs to be understood, and we might see that sort of coming back as a result, but time will tell, I suppose.
Right. Definitely.
I had my last question, which we'll see where this goes, but I wanted to ask, like, finish the sentence. I know this is controversial, but
Okay. I know this is controversial, but I think hold on. I know this is controversial, but I think you shouldn't delete your photos off of your desktop, your screenshot photos, because one day you might need one of those screenshots again, and you never know when it's going to be. And so, for my part, I will always keep my screenshots, and my desktop is what it is, and I don't want to hear any judgment about it.
I imagine that you could probably create one of those like mosaic collages of all of
Yes, 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 yes. I have given many colleagues a heart attack over it. And I'm like, no, no, I might need that screenshot that I took of that one article or Slack post or whatever it is one day. You just never know.
Yep. I mean, I've gone through this a couple times, and you're building out an intranet, and you're like, okay, I need something for that corner of that page.
Right.
What can I put there? It's always great to have a nice bank of all these different, employee engagement experience.
Yeah.
All the folks just smiling and having a great time together. Nice to reinforce that stuff and have those things ever present. So, do you ever find yourself like just kind of putting them into random tactics that you create for comms?
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. And it's because I like to reference and call back on things that we've done in the past. And so as I'm building those things out, it can be helpful. I am a little bit more organized when it comes to company photos and things. That I one thing that we created actually on our intranet, when I was at the Motley Fool, was what we called the yearbook. And so it was a set of pages that was designed to hold all of our employee photos. And I really enjoyed that. Something I would want to recreate at some point.
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's like being on the news almost. People get excited if they find their face, in that story that goes out to everybody, and it's just another kind of form of engagement. Doesn't take a lot, but it kind of makes a difference for the people out there, right? So
Yeah, slow look for sure.
nice. We will switch to the last segment. I kind of wanted to know, what's one principle or philosophy you try to live by in your work?
Um, a few things that come to mind for me. The first is that clear is kind, and that's something that I will always advocate for with my leaders. Is that the kindest thing that you can do is to be clear with people. So transparency is obviously incorporated into that as well. Um, and the overarching philosophy is that everything is a signal. Everything that we do day in and day out, we're sending signals all the time, whether we mean to or not. And so that's kind of where I go back to a communicator, back to the beginning of communicators as strategic partners to help you make sure you're sending the right signals, because you are sending signals that you're not necessarily being cognizant of. You're not thinking about, well, what is even implementing this policy going to, tell people underneath the surface, right? We're just thinking kind of surface level about things versus zooming out more broadly and looking at holistically, what is the signal I'm sending, and is it what I want to send? Because it might not always be, right? And being honest with yourself about, you have to be honest and dig kind of beneath the surface level thing to find that real truth. And I think sometimes we have to push our executives to find that truth of, what is it that you really want to say?
Mhm.
Is it this? Is this what you really want to say? Then okay, let's build towards that instead of build towards this.
Right.
Uh, so be clear, be kind, and always think about the signals that you're putting out into the world.
I swear every one of these interviews I've done, there's been at least one great slogan around empathy. So
Yeah.
it really just it is seemingly something that's built in for this kind of role. But you've given me us a couple good slogans or taglines that we can maybe put on sticky notes around the edge of our screens. So that's
I
good.
figured it. That's great. Yeah. I love a sticky note. I love a sticky note. I have to use them. I have a whole, speaking of collages, yes, sticky notes for life.
Yeah, yeah. The other question that I had was if you had any recommendations of who we should maybe talk to next and why you think that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've met so many great folks in the field over the years, but I think Emily Primo, she is an excellent communicator. She is really helping folks find and maintain their voice in a world of AI. Works for the leads up over at the Dragonfly editorial, so I think she is would be an excellent one to consider.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for the recommendation.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, maybe we'll stop here. So that's it for today's episode of Unmuted. If you like what you heard today, don't forget to rate, review, follow, and send it to someone who believes great communication can actually change things, because it can, as we've talked about today. So remember, if your organization's still on mute when it comes to comms and knowledge, Happeo is here to help turn up the volume. Until next time, keep talking, keep listening, and whatever you do, stay unmuted.